Verse 546. In the time to come, there will be disparagers of my teaching who, putting on the Kashaya robe, will talk about being and non-being and its works. We're really getting a sense now of somebody writing this text. Now this sutra, although it's presented as being spoken by the Buddha, it wasn't spoken by the Buddha. It's been written down some centuries after the Buddha, and it's been put as if it was the Buddha's words. So the author has the advantage of hindsight and can put words into the Buddha talking about times to come, because the author has the advantage of hindsight. But never mind all that. The Kashaya robe is simply the robes of the Buddhist monk. And at this time there will have been different Kashaya robes, because it wasn't long after the passing away of the Buddha that different schools began forming, and they had different coloured robes. So clearly the author here isn't too happy about what some Buddhists are teaching, and describes these Buddhists as disparagers of the teaching. So the author of this text clearly identifies with the Buddha, but more importantly, the author identifies with the enlightenment of the Buddha. And as far as I'm concerned, that's fair enough. This is a text which comes from the enlightened mind. So there's no difference between what the author is saying and what the Buddha would have said. But there's a crack appearing here, because we can see that it's not actually the Buddha, it's somebody writing after the Buddha, but somebody who has realized enlightenment for themselves. But this is clearly somebody who is an enlightenment practitioner. And he's a little bit upset, obviously, about these people going around with the authority of Buddhists espousing teachings which have got nothing to do with enlightenment. And here it's described as talking about being and non-being and its works. Being and non-being is hyphenated like it's one word. And what this refers to is the discriminating faculty. The early Buddhists, for whatever reason, started getting caught up in these quite extraordinary classifications of what they regarded as fundamental elements. They had this idea that everything could be reduced to fundamental elements. Sometimes the word used is dharmas, fundamental dharmas, and these dharmas could be described as conditioned or unconditioned. The unconditioned ones relating to nirvana. And the problem with this is making enlightenment an object, a mental construct. And the whole business is missing the point completely. Enlightenment has got lost. Enlightenment practice has been forgotten in favour of this mental activity. And this is the trouble. This is the trouble. I pointed out previously how it's a huge mistake to regard the Buddha as some kind of philosopher. Philosophy is a mental exercise. Buddhism, or enlightenment practice, is not. Buddhism isn't supposed to be a mental exercise, but this is what it's become by and large, which is why I find it preferable to talk about enlightenment practice. Enlightenment practice is not a mental exercise. It never can be. It's not about getting used to ideas. It's not about trying to understand reality. It's not about trying to understand anything. Understanding is a function of the mind. Enlightenment practice goes beyond this. It transcends the mind. It transcends the world. It comes back to the awareness which is necessary for all mental activity, for all cognition. The awareness that's necessary for all cognition. The awareness that's necessary for all experience. This isn't a philosophical point of view. It's an empirical point of view. It's a directly observable point of view. Enlightenment practice is pure empiricism. It's more empirical than science. Science subscribes to the idea that there's an external physical world. And there are people like scientists who can examine it. That's an assumption. It's not empirical. If you're truly empirical, you come right back to the awareness which is experiencing everything. This is directly knowable. So this is quite unfortunate when Buddhism becomes a philosophy, when it becomes a mental activity. This is the easy way out. Once you can get your head around something, that's easy. And unfortunately, this is what Buddhism is for many people. There are so many books about Buddhism. There are so many doctrines. There's just so much you can learn if you're a Buddhist. And some people are happy like that, like pigs in mud. I don't want to spoil their enjoyment, let them get on with it, but we have to be quite clear that this is not enlightenment practice. This wonderful edifice called Buddhism, and it truly is magnificent, absolutely magnificent. I mean, I love all these ideas as well. I'm kind of an idea sort of person, but this is not what Buddhism's about. It's not what enlightenment, well, it's not what it was originally about. So this is why I come back to enlightenment practice. So these disparagers of the teaching talk about being and non-being and its works. I'm not quite sure what its works refers to, but I think we can just say the implications of this discrimination mentality. And we've got quite a few verses coming up which are concerned with taking quite a few knocks at these upstarts, which should be fun. But before we do that, there's one verse I think we can look at. The next verse, 547. Things born of causation are non-existent. This is the realm of the wise. A thing imagined has no reality, yet things are imagined by the Theorisers. So this is what we're up against, the Theorisers. And the Theorisers like to talk about causation. The Buddha spoke about causation, and This was the teaching he gave to the Shravikas, as pointed out in verse 544. But the teachings he gives to the Bodhisattvas, 545, these begin with no cause, no cause. So we have to get over notions of causation, which are very fundamental Buddhist teachings. You've got not only the wheel of life, the cycle of conditioned co-production, also known as the Bhava Chakra, you've also got the Four Noble Truths themselves. They are dependent on causation. But I think I've got a video devoted to these, which hopefully you can find in the index link in the notes below the video. So we have to get beyond causation, because things born of causation are non-existent. It's a story. Causation is a story. It's a story of how things came to be. But as enlightenment practitioner, we give up on that story. We give up on the story of individual entities. This is the realm of the wise. The whole notion of individual entities, like the individual entities that appear in a dream, are no more than imagination. What in this text is usually referred to as the false imagination, the parikalpita. That's the technical term, the parikalpita, which again has been covered in previous videos. So the theorizers deal with concepts. Concepts are the imagination. They deal with abstractions. Abstractions are the imagination. The enlightenment practitioner is purely empirical and comes back to what I refer to as the absolute, which is that awareness which can theorize. It's the awareness which does the theorizing. It's the awareness which experiences. The awareness which gives rise to ideas. It gives rise to creativity. It gives rise to all of creation. So we'll hear about some of these theorizers in the next verse.